Roman Abramovich has now been added to the UK sanctions list.
Chelsea's football club shop closed for business 2 hours after its owner was told he could no longer do business in the UK.
Oligarchs in London will have nowhere to hide.
Money is the game, power is the aim. City's gonna pay when they got nothing to lose. He's got nothing to lose. No, it's in too deep, soul to soul, and it wasn't cheap. He's got nothing to lose. He's got nothing to lose. Yeah, we're going to war. He's a gangster.
London, one of the most globally renowned cities. It has been a favorite destination for Russian oligarchs and their businesses. Or at least, it was at some point. In fact, one of the many nicknames for the city is Londongrad, a reference to the massive business empire of Moscow's oligarchs that lies behind those grand walls and classical buildings.
How's your research?
It's interesting because throughout the process of research and particularly looking at the case study of Dimitris Ayonades, I was amazed by the idea that one of the names attributed to the city of London was Londongrad, and I was wondering why did it have this or build up this reputation?
Yeah, so I would say that the story of London and Russian money probably dates back to the fall of the Soviet Union in 1989. You had suddenly, this massive amount of money that was available to several individuals who were at the top, of high and big companies. And obviously, they just wanted to stash it somewhere. The idea was we have suddenly, in many different ways, some of them in corrupt ways, we have suddenly become rich. Let's park all this money somewhere where we know that it's going to be, it's going to be a trusted jurisdiction, it's going to be a place where our property is going to be protected because there is something called the rule of law. And so London was the best place on earth in that sense. So you see from the 1990s up until today, literally, lots of inflows of Russian money coming, buying real estate, purchasing, lots of art, relying a lot on professional, lawyers, accountants, all these kind of individuals, and then using London as their favorite place on earth, buying lots of luxury goods. So Londongrad became a sort of metaphor for explaining all this Russian money coming, but also the Russian diaspora, of people deciding to make London their home. Very recently, it also became, the sort of name that indicates the fact that not only we have opened the money, like this city, to any kind of money, but also to some potential dirty money. As I said, some of that was proceeds of corruption or other illicit activities.
It's quite interesting. Do you believe that since the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the war that ensued as well afterwards, has this remained the case or has anything changed?
Well, definitely the full-scale aggression invasion of Ukraine by Russia in February 2022, it basically put a spotlight on the issue of dirty money in London and the whole idea that London had become Londongrad. So we've seen, I would say, over the past 2 years, a series of reforms aimed at tackling economic crime. We had lots of sanctions that had been imposed, on the so-called oligarchs and associates. And then in the meantime, we had all this legislative work that came out. We had 2 economic crime acts that were trying to close some of the loopholes, they were facilitating the laundering of proceeds. And on the other hand, we were freezing the assets of individuals that were supposedly, linked to Russia and Putin's regimes and what was happening in Ukraine. So has it changed the situation? Definitely. We have lots of property here now in London that is being frozen, and the sanctions. We have seen a couple of cases of confiscations, not so many as we would probably want to and would love to see, but it has been, it has changed a little bit the situation. I'm afraid that the reputation of London as, the dirty money capital, it's still there, and it's going to take a little bit of time to go away.
But who is Dimitris, the Cypriot middleman, about whom it is difficult to find any verified information regarding his origins or his business dealings?
I've come across the piece by the oligarch files published by The Guardian, and also the ICIJ's Cyprus confidential investigation, which cast light on Dimitris Ayonades, the notorious middleman who has supported a few Russian oligarchs through his company Merit Service in Cyprus. Did we have any information about Dimitris's early career before Merit Service?
Yes, he's been in the corporate services business, you can call it, for many years. He started out opening the Cyprus office for the large accountancy Deloitte back in 1988. And then in 2005, he decided to go into business for himself. And that's when he started this service organization called Merit Service. And that also happened to be the year that the Russian oligarch Roman Abramovich had his oil company bought out. So Mr. Abramovich came into $13 billion, became one of the world's richest people, and certainly one of Russia's richest people that same year. And another interesting thing that happened that year is that an oligarch who became too active in Russian politics, Mikhail Khodorkovsky, was thrown in jail. So every other oligarch, including Abramovich, knew that they had to become Putin's people, but they also knew that all of their money was kind of threatened with being held hostage, and so there was a big incentive for rich people in Russia to try to get as much money as they could out of Russia beyond Putin's reach and into a place that was connected to the rest of the world's economy. And Cyprus became tax and secrecy specialists, where they can set up trusts. It's a member of the European Union, so they have branches of all the banks in Britain and Switzerland and even, the United States. So, what Ayonades did for someone like Abramovich was set up a trust, and then within the trust, the money of Abramovich was held by hundreds of corporations. Those corporations were set up in yet another country, like the British Virgin Islands, the Isle of Man, the Isle of Jersey. And so the only names that would show up to someone on the outside would be officers and directors who were supplied by Ayonades or another service firm like him.
Fast forward maybe perhaps to April 2023, Dimitris Ayonades was sanctioned by the UK Foreign Office, and he was coined at the time as an oligarch enabler. But the real question at the moment is, how effective were the UK sanctions in hurting the oligarchs financially, and where do the sanctions fall short?
Yeah, I think think with the sanctions, it's difficult to measure the success. I mean, they're like a foreign policy tool. Governments deploy them for specific reasons to tackle particular political problems or deadlocks, and that's kind of what's happened with the Russian war in Ukraine. Obviously, it's a huge nuisance to oligarchs like Roman Abramovich to have to sell up or lose assets like Chelsea, or have their prized properties frozen for several years that they can't use anymore. Does it take them out? Not entirely, but it sends a message. And these are some of the oligarchs who are also among the leading business figures in Russia and actually run big businesses that are part of the Russian economy. So it does make things more difficult, but it doesn't sort of take them out, let's say.
How did Dimitris actually assist Roman Abramovich in light of the UK sanctions following the Russian invasion?
Yeah, I think the main service that we know he provided to Abramovich around the time of the start of the war in 2022 was helping him shift sort of ownership and control of some of his key assets. A lot of that happened like right before the invasion.
Right.
So what we see in all the leaked documents that we got was all of these trusts and companies started to shift around, the ownership structures start to change. So for example, Abramovich and his ex-wife owned this amazing $1 billion art collection that had all the biggest art names from the last 200 years, Matisse, Monet, Modigliani, really famous, amazing pieces. And it was worth $1 billion. It was a huge private collection. That was owned ultimately by a trust, which Abramovich and his ex-wife owned 50-50. And just as that announcement came in that sanctions were threatened, the ownership structure changed to be 51-49, 51 to the ex-wife and 49 to Abramovich. And the reason for that is basically sanctions only apply to assets which a sanctioned person owns 50% or more of. So if you only own 49% of a $1 billion art collection, that art collection is safe from freezing measures that governments would otherwise be able to implement if you own more. And so it's quite clear that why that change happened. There could be an argument, could you freeze the assets, or could you sanction the wife because perhaps she's being a proxy for the spouse? But legally, those assets, as long as she isn't sanctioned, are safe. So another example was Abramovich owned a series of trusts that held a bunch of different assets, businesses and prize assets like super yachts. And he was the owner of several trusts. Let's say he was the beneficiary of all these trusts. And then right before the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022, his children become the beneficiaries of these trusts. And some of his children are as young as 9 years old or certainly minors. And so clearly this 9-year-old child doesn't own
not conducting
a super
business.
yacht worth hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
But that asset, who's the real beneficiary of that asset? Who actually owns that asset? Legally, it goes back to this child, but in reality, it's going to be Abramovich. And then what do you do as an enforcement agency looking at that asset? So it's a very difficult question, I think, for governments and enforcement agencies to tackle. It's one of the big challenges, I think, of the sanctions regime of the last couple of years.
How did the measures actually affect Dimitris Ayonades' firm, Merit Service, or is he just too big to be sanctioned at this stage?
The effect of those sanctions is significant, particularly US sanctions. If you're sanctioned by the US, you can't transact in the US dollar. That's the global currency of trade and commerce. So that creates real problems for anyone who's sanctioned. And it also kind of creates a bit of a black mark against your name. Any bank or law firm or risk group screening a deal or a client who sees that name is going to have every alarm bell ringing, and that sort of stays with you. Yeah. So it's kind of a black mark. And in terms of the kind of particular effect on Ayonades for Merit Service, it appears to have shut up shop. At least its website disappeared offline. There hasn't been any great public announcement, so it's not really clear what, if anything, the firm is doing. But at least it doesn't seem to be actively in business anymore in the same way, and it wouldn't be able to be doing many of the things it did before. I mean, a lot of its business was working, creating companies to transact in international deals and structure assets. You can't really do that once you get internationally sanctioned. It's probably worth saying as well that a kind of cousin firm called Merit Capital is still in business. So that's run by Ayonades' daughter, and I believe his son has also worked there. But he was also involved at a certain point in time. Previously he was named as one of the team members on the website, listed among with the others with his daughter and so on. So he has been involved in the business at some stage. But yeah, they say he is no longer.
So OCCRP and The Guardian started going through these files. They brought me in and other journalists around the world. And then in January of 2023, that's when we started publishing insights into Ayonades' business and Merit Service. And then the ICIJ did more. So I think that his business was pretty much ruined after that. I don't think the sanctions that the UK came along with a few months after our stories, or anything that Cyprus does now compares to the fact that 20 years worth of secrets that he kept for people like Roman Abramovich ended up on the world's front pages. I think that's enough to end the career of somebody like him in the secrecy business.
So in your research, obviously, I remember seeing a big board, lots of different people, individuals and transactions. How is that research going, especially on those men that we haven't talked about yet?
I think the person that you have pointed towards is Dan Gertler, a middleman with a notorious reputation.
He's a